The house was everything I had hoped for: spacious, affordable, with a charm that hinted at its long history. Nestled in a quiet suburb, it was the kind of home people dream of raising a family in. After the long process of moving in, I finally settled down, believing that this place would be my fresh start. But from the very first night, a sense of unease settled over me like an invisible weight. Creaks and nights, I heard faint noises, creaks in the walls, floorboards shifting, a light tapping that I attributed to the house's age. I told myself it was nothing unusual. Houses make sounds, especially old ones. I pushed the thoughts aside, eager to focus on the positives. The extra space, the quietness of the neighborhood, and how cozy it felt. But that sense of warmth was soon replaced by something darker. It was on the fourth night that the unsettling feeling grew stronger. I had fallen asleep after a long day of unpacking when I suddenly woke up, heart racing. My room was plunged in darkness, save for the faint light from the street lamp outside. For a moment, I thought the shadow in the corner of my room was a trick of the dim light. I blinked, trying to clear my sleep-addled mind, but the shadow didn't disappear. At first, I didn't move, frozen by the sight of the figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was tall, motionless, and its features were indistinguishable, swallowed by the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, the air growing thick with terror. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I wasn't alone. Every instinct told me to run, but my body refused to cooperate. I lay there, staring, paralyzed with fear. Seconds felt like hours, and then, just like that, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, the next, the shadow dissolved into the dark corners of the room. I sat up, panting, drenched in sweat. I told myself it was a nightmare, stress from the move, fatigue, and overactive imagination. I wanted to believe that more than anything, but deep down I knew something was wrong. In the following days, the strange occurrences escalated. The tapping noises became louder, more deliberate, echoing through the house at night. Once, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. Slow, measured steps. But when I gathered the courage to check, no one was there. I started sleeping with the lights on, but it didn't help. The house was always cold, no matter how high I set the thermostat. It felt as though I was being watched, even when I was alone. One evening, while sitting in the living room, I heard the unmistakable sound of whispering. It was faint, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I strained to listen, my heart pounding as I tried to locate the source, but it seemed to come from all directions at once. I couldn't make out the words, only that they were there, hovering in the stillness, surrounding me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was hiding something. My nights were plagued by nightmares, visions of the shadowy figure standing over me, whispering things I couldn't understand. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the house's history, hoping to find a logical explanation. What I discovered was far from comforting. The house had been owned by a man named Samuel Hall, a recluse who had lived there for years until his sudden and mysterious death. The circumstances surrounding his demise were vague, but local rumors suggested something sinister. Neighbors claimed that strange things happened in the house, even when Hall was alive. Lights flickering, objects moving on their own, and voices echoing in the night. There were whispers that Hall had been involved in the occult, dabbling in things that should have remained untouched. He had isolated himself in the house for months before his death, and when they found him, he was lying in bed, eyes wide open as if he had seen something terrifying in his final moments. The official report labeled it as a heart attack, but the rumors painted a darker picture. Armed with this knowledge, I realized the shadowy figure I had seen wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was him, Samuel Hall, or whatever was left of him. The thought chilled me to my core, but I wasn't about to let fear consume me. I had to face whatever was haunting me. That night, I went to bed prepared, determined to confront the entity once and for all. I kept the lights on, refusing to let the darkness take hold. I lay there, heart hammering in my chest, waiting for the inevitable. Hours passed, the house eerily silent, until once again, I felt the cold presence. Slowly, I opened my eyes, and there he was, standing at the foot of my... This time I didn't freeze. I forced myself to sit up, my gaze locked on the figure. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't move, didn't speak, but the room grew colder, and I could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on me. Then, just as suddenly as before, it vanished. After that night, the house seemed to change. The noises stopped, the coldness lifted, and the oppressive atmosphere that had clung to me for weeks faded away. It was as if confronting the spirit had freed me, or perhaps freed it. I can't say for certain what happened to Samuel Hall or why his spirit lingered in the house, but I do know that I wasn't alone in that room. I stayed in the house, determined not to let fear drive me away, and over time, I found a sense of peace in the place that had once filled me with terror. But I never forgot the shadowy figure, and to this day, I sometimes wonder if Samuel Hall was trying to warn me, or if he was merely watching, waiting for the next person to occupy his home. The apartment had seemed perfect when I first moved in. Affordable, close to work, and modern. I didn't give much thought to its history, or even the fact that it had been vacant for months before I signed the lease. It wasn't until a few weeks in that I noticed things weren't quite right. It started with subtle things. A persistent cold spot in the living room, lights flickering for no apparent reason. I brushed them off at first, convincing myself that old wiring or drafty windows were to blame. But deep down, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The cold spot followed me, a chill that clung to the air. No matter how high I set the thermostat, I'd feel it most often in the middle of the night, an icy breath against my skin when I was supposed to be alone in bed. The flickering lights weren't just an annoyance anymore. They began to feel like a warning, as if the apartment itself was trying to tell me something. But it wasn't until I experienced something truly strange that I realized how bad things had gotten. One evening, I came home late after a long day at work. Exhaustion weighed me down, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed and forget the world. But as I walked past the living room, I saw it, out of the corner of my eye. A shadow that shouldn't. I froze, heart pounding, and turned slowly to look. There was nothing. The room was empty, just as I had left it. But the feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sense that I wasn't alone was overpowering. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the shadows made my skin crawl. I decided to set up a camera in my bedroom, hoping to prove to myself that I was just being paranoid. Maybe if I saw nothing, I could finally rest. Or so I thought. The next morning, I woke up groggy but curious to check the footage. I hooked the camera up to my laptop and hit play. For the first few minutes, there was nothing. Just me, sleeping soundly. But then, at around 2 a.m., something happened. The camera flickered for a moment, static flashing across the screen. When the picture stabilized, my blood ran cold. Standing behind me as I slept was a figure, tall, shadowy, and indistinct. Its features were blurred, as if the camera itself couldn't quite capture its presence. But there was no mistaking it. A someone or something had been in my... I watched in horror as the figure stood there, unmoving, watching me sleep for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, it vanished. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart racing. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It was impossible. I was alone in that apartment, or so I had thought. After the shock wore off, I knew I couldn't stay in the apartment without understanding what I was dealing with. I started digging into the building's history, hoping to find some kind of explanation. It wasn't long before I uncovered a disturbing pattern. Over the years, several tenants had gone missing from the apartment, disappearing without a trace. Police reports were filed, but no evidence was ever found. The building owner had changed hands multiple times, and each time, the mysterious disappearances were swept under the rug. The most unsettling part: all of the missing tenants had lived in my apartment. I spent hours scouring old news articles and online forums, piecing together the tragic fates of those who had come before me. There were whispers of hauntings, stories of tenants hearing voices in the walls, feeling cold spots, and witnessing flickering lights, just like some claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking in their homes before they disappeared. And now, knowing the truth didn't bring me any peace. If anything, it made things worse. The cold spots intensified, spreading throughout the apartment like an invisible fog. The lights no longer just flickered. They began to pulse erratically, like they were being controlled by some unseen force. And every night, I felt it. The presence. Standing at the edge of my bed, watching me. I tried everything to get rid of it. Burning sage, hanging protective symbols, even consulting a medium. But nothing worked. The figure kept coming back, lingering in the shadows, waiting for me to fall asleep. My friends told me to leave, to break the lease and never look back. But something held me there. It was as if the apartment didn't want to let me go. One night, after yet another sleepless evening, I reached my breaking point. I could no longer live in fear. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and sheer desperation, I decided to confront the figure. I set the camera up again, this time determined to capture its appearance in real time. I stayed awake, lying in bed, pretending to sleep, waiting for the familiar chill to signal its arrival. It came at 3 a.m. I felt the cold sweep over me like a wave, the air thick with tension. Slowly, I opened my eyes. And there it was, standing at the foot of my bed, its form darker than the surrounding shadows. I sat up, my heart pounding, and did the only thing I could think of. I spoke. "What do you want?" My voice shook, but I didn't care. The figure remained silent, but something in the room shifted. The air seemed to vibrate, and for a moment I thought I heard whispers, faint, indistinct, but the lights flickered violently. And I could feel the pressure building in my chest, as if the apartment itself was suffocating me. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished. The cold lifted, the lights returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling was gone. I sat there, gasping for breath, my body trembling. The figure was gone, but I knew it wouldn't stay away for long. The next morning, I packed my things and left the apartment. I didn't even bother with the lease. I just couldn't stay there anymore. I don't know what was haunting that place, and I don't think I ever will. But I do know that whatever it was, it didn't want me to leave. I haven't looked back since. We had always dreamed of escaping the city for a quieter life. And when we found the old farmhouse nestled on the outskirts of town, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. My partner and I were enchanted by its rustic charm, the wooden beams, the sprawling fields, the history that seemed etched into its very walls. It needed some work, sure, but we were up for the challenge. With our 2 kids in tow, we moved in, ready to start fresh. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. The kids played outside. We spent our evenings sitting by the fire, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. But then, things began to change. It started small little things that were easy to overlook. A door left open when I was sure I'd closed it. The sound of footsteps on the stairs when no one was there. I tried to brush it off as the quirks of an old house settling, but deep down a sense of unease began to creep. As the days went on, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. Doors didn't just open on their own. They slammed with such force that the walls rattled. Items would go missing, only to reappear in odd places days later. The kids started complaining about things too, hearing whispers in the hallway, feeling like someone was watching them. My partner was skeptical at first, but even they couldn't deny that something was. One night, we were sitting in the living room when we heard a loud crash from upstairs. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, but when we rushed up to check, nothing was out of place. The kids were fast asleep in their beds, undisturbed, but as I stood in the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the house. I tried to push the thoughts away, to rationalize what was happening. Maybe the house was just old, full of drafts and creaky floorboards. But the more it happened, the more impossible it became to ignore. Something wasn't right in that farmhouse. Things came to a head when we decided to do some cleaning in the attic. We had been putting it off since we moved in, but curiosity finally got the better of us. As we sifted through the piles of old furniture and dusty boxes, I found something strange. A small leather-bound journal tucked away in the corner. The pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting spidery and hard to read. As I flipped through the journal, my heart began to race. It wasn't just the writings of some former resident. It was a detailed account of the strange occurrences we had been experiencing. The entries described doors slamming, items vanishing, and an overwhelming sense of dread that had plagued the writer. But as I read on, the entries became darker talks of a presence in the house, a malevolent force that tormented the writer and their family. The final entry sent chills down my spine. It's here. I can feel it watching me. I don't know how much longer we can stay. I fear for my family. I sat there staring at the page, my hands trembling. Whoever had written this had experienced the same things we were going through, and they hadn't made it out. After finding the journal, everything changed. The activity in the house became more intense. The slamming doors were now accompanied by heavy footsteps that echoed through the halls, and the cold spots we felt were unbearable. One night, as I was putting the kids to bed, I saw something. Just a glimpse of a shadow at the edge of my vision, darting across the hallway. It was gone before I could fully register it, but the fear it left behind was undeniable. My partner, who had remained calm throughout all of this, finally admitted that they had been hearing things too, voices late at night calling their name. We couldn't ignore it any longer. Whatever was in the house wasn't just a figment of our imaginations, it was real, and it wanted us out. We didn't know where to turn, but after reading the journal and experiencing everything ourselves, we knew we couldn't handle it alone. I reached out to a paranormal investigator, someone with experience in dealing with these kinds of situations. He came to the house a few days later, his presence a strange mix of calm and intensity. The moment he stepped inside, his demeanor shifted. He told us that the house was indeed haunted, that something had latched onto it, something dark. He conducted a series of rituals, attempting to cleanse the space and rid it of whatever malevolent force had taken hold. As he walked through the house, speaking in low tones, the air felt heavy, thick with tension. It wasn't until he entered the attic that things truly took a turn. The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt a pressure in my chest, like the house itself was holding its breath. The investigator stood still for a moment before turning to us, his face. "This is where it's strongest," he said quietly. "Whatever's here doesn't want to leave." That night, the tension in the house reached its peak. The slamming doors, the footsteps, the voices. They all came at once, like the house was erupting in fury. The kids were terrified, huddled together in our room as we tried to calm them down. But the presence wasn't just in the house. It was with us in the room, surrounding us with an oppressive force that made it hard to breathe. We sat together in the middle of the room, waiting for something to happen, praying for it to end. The house groaned and creaked around us, the temperature dropping to an unbearable cold. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the silence that followed was deafening. We waited for what felt like hours, but nothing happened. The investigator told us that the entity was gone, at least for now. But the look in his eyes told me that we weren't truly safe. We left the farmhouse not long after that. I couldn't stay, knowing what had happened there, knowing that the presence might still linger. The journal was left behind, a reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within those walls. To this day, I don't know what haunted that house or why it chose us. But I do know that some places carry more than just memories. They carry shadows, echoes of the past that refuse to fade. And sometimes, those shadows reach out from the we never look back. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.